Hey everyone, welcome back to Reissued. If you're new here, my name is Andrew. Today we are continuing on with the living room makeover by working on the ceiling. Now, if you missed the living room planning video, pause this video, go check that one out now. In that video, I share all of my plans for the living room so far, as well as some thoughts and tips on getting started on planning a space in general. Getting started is often the hardest part, but one of the first plans that I had is to remove the 9-foot drop ceiling and restore the original 12-foot ceiling. As I've mentioned several times, all of the rooms on this side of my house, the studio, the living room, and the kitchen all had dropped ceilings. We have removed all of them so far except for the living room, so we thought we'd tackle that one as well and restore all the rooms in my house to that 12-foot ceiling. Now, in the kitchen, we did a wood tongue and groove ceiling that worked with the beadboard in that room. Here in the studio, I wanted to keep things light and bright, so we went with the drywall ceiling with moldings placed on top for an ornate detail. In the living room, I want that space to be dark and moody and cozy, so we're gonna be going for a dark wood coffered ceiling kind of look. And as usual here at Reissued, we're gonna try to use as much stuff as we already have on hand, partly to keep the cost down, but also to keep from having to throw anything away. I hate throwing things away, so let's put it to good use. I can't wait to get started today and show you this incredible ceiling transformation. Let's jump on it. Now, before we get started, if you like this video and enjoyed this process, be sure to hit the like button. Also, if you want to stay up to date on my ongoing living room transformation, as well as see other makeover projects, be sure that you're subscribed. So, as I mentioned, we're starting with a 9-foot drop ceiling. It's heavily textured. It's making this space feel smaller than I'd like it to feel, so we're gonna take that out entirely. Here's the plan. First, we're gonna remove all of the drywall on the textured drop ceiling and then go up to the original 12-foot ceiling and repair any structural issues. Then we're gonna put up 4x8 sheets of furniture grade plywood to cover up that 12-foot ceiling and remove the 2x6s that are the structure of the drop ceiling to open up the room. Then we can reuse those 2x6s that we pulled down to put up on the new ceiling and cover up all the seams from our plywood to give that kind of coffered ceiling look. And finally, we're gonna create our own molding using the leftover 2x6s to cover up the attachment points of the 2x6s and give that nice detailed look. Are you with me so far? Let's get started. Okay, so we got the whole room cleared out, and today is the day we are taking out the ceiling. Even though we are constantly doing projects here at the house, it's not often that we do projects that fundamentally change the way the space feels. And we're gonna be coming up on a lot of those projects with the ceiling and painting the floor and painting the walls and installing the cabinets. All of those things are massive and are really gonna change the way that this space feels. So it's very exciting and it kicks off right now. After taking down the old gross ceiling fan, we can remove the crown molding around the top of the room. We're planning to save this and put it back after stripping off the layers of paint and texture, of course. I also cut a little hole in the ceiling to look up inside and see what we're working with. It's pretty dark, so let's snap some photos with a flash. Yeah, this looks super rough. A lot of the lats have fallen and the insulation's coming through, not to mention lots of dust and debris, but the upper walls seem to be in decent shape at least, so that's good.
Are you spying? Get out of here. Spying. Are you gonna get her? Are you? Get out here, get out here, go, go, go. You would hate to not be included, don't you?
After an unauthorized visit from Queenie and Sam, let's take down the drywall. We found it was easiest to take down the drywall in small sections by cutting it down and then pulling it out with a pry bar. We tried to keep the pieces upright so as not to dump all the dust and debris on top of them into the floor, but mistakes were made and dust is pretty inevitable, so it ended up everywhere. Our whole plan for this process was based on taking down the studio ceiling, which was constructed in the same way. That allowed us to kind of know what we were getting into. But ripping down the ceiling in the studio wasn't so messy since we were able to control the removal process enough to contain the mess. Plus, the original ceiling was in better shape in that room, so there was less potential mess to start with. But here, the mess of dust and grit and insulation was fully unleashed. Drywall, we can start to get a sense of how the higher ceiling will feel. Now, you can't really see it here, but here on the ceiling you have these large joists that are the structure of the house. Then there are 1x4s that are nailed up into those, and then the lats are nailed to the 1x4s to allow the original ceiling to be plastered. However, the 1x4s were pulling away from the joists and some of the nails had come out entirely, hence the areas that were falling down and really low. So our next step was to repair the structure of the ceiling by screwing the 1x4s back into the joists. Screws will hold much better than nails and help us to get the ceiling pretty flat and secure again. After screwing every point of intersection around the entire room, we then had to go back and nail all the falling lats back to support the insulation and give us an even surface for our wood to cover. I didn't end up filming this process at all. I guess I subconsciously didn't want to remember how tedious and gross it was, so let's all collectively forget that it happened.
All right, so this is fun. Yeah, it's funny. We were like, oh, this is not going to be a big deal. We did this in the other room and it wasn't too bad. I think, partly it's easier in retrospect to think that things aren't difficult, but also the ceiling is so much dirtier than the last one. We think that maybe someone stepped down through the ceiling because there were so many areas that were falling and crumbling and then had to get screwed back up, which made the lats come out, which made more dust fall. Every time we tried to hammer something back in, it was just black dust falling in your eyes. So it was just so unpleasant. We're still not quite done. There's a couple areas that need to get done still. But yeah, this is how we make progress and it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good.
Needless to say, I did a lot of laundry during this process, which was made better than ever by Breeze, which is the sponsor of today's video. Now, if you're like me and you have sensitive skin, you know that laundry detergents can be one of the worst offenders when it comes to triggering sensitive skin and causing flare-ups and breakouts and rashes. You know the struggle. So I am super careful with the detergents that I use because one wrong thing on my skin can mess me up for months. And a lot of detergents contain optical brighteners that can irritate sensitive skin. So I tried Breeze since their detergents are hypoallergenic, dermatologist tested, and free of optical brighteners. And I'm loving it. No harsh chemicals or unnecessary additives, just a simple clean wash. I've been using the fragrance-free option for my sensitive skin, but I gave my parents the kind with the fragrance, which smells amazing, and they've been loving it as well. Right now, you can head to the link in the description to get 40% off with your auto shipment. When you take on those projects that get your hands and your clothes dirty, protect your skin and your clothes with Breeze. After wrapping up attaching all the lats, we could remove the two center supports from the old drop ceiling to allow us a space to get the larger 4x8 pieces up in between. We leave the rest to give us a place to rest the wood since we'll have to lift it overhead and screw it in place. This was the same process we followed for the drywall sheets in the studio, and that worked really well. Now we can prep our 1/2-inch 4x8 sheets of furniture grade plywood. I got these at Home Depot for like $45 each, so this was the priciest part of the project. Since this is just pine, I wanted to use a pre-stain conditioner to try to get these to stain as evenly as possible. So we apply the conditioner and wait about 15 minutes before applying the stain. The stain I'm using is Minwax in the shade Espresso, the same stain that I used on the fireplace in the bedroom. However, that fireplace is oak and these are pine, so even though the color looked okay upon application, it started looking a little gray when it dried.
Okay, so I feel like today we've reached the point in the process where I'm doubting everything. Yeah, the stain color is not exactly what I was hoping for. I think it needs to be more red, so we'll probably go in and do a second coat with a more reddish kind of stain. Some of the plywood pieces are more beautiful than others, so we'll have to kind of strategically place things to make them not look crappy. But there's good progress as well. It's just, again, this is the point where doubt creeps in, so we just gotta push through that and hopefully it'll turn out okay.
So for the second coat of stain, my mom and I removed some of the espresso stain from the gallon in case we needed it later. We did, in fact, end up using it later. And then we added quite a bit of reddish stain in the shade Jara to warm up the color. We tested it at various stages and continued to add red until we arrived at this shade. I tested the polyurethane over the top to check the color, and I'm really happy with this, especially with our Storm Chaser shade that's gonna go on the built-ins. So let's stain. Again. For all of the stain applications throughout this process, we applied with the brush and then wiped off the excess with a rag. No gloves this time, so my hands looked like a swamp witch for days. I'm so much happier with this color, although it's still looking kinda ashy. So hopefully the polyurethane will help with that. This poly is in a warm satin finish that has a bit of an amber tone to it, so that should help us achieve more warmth. And it did! After 3 coats! We needed multiple coats to achieve an even sheen and had to leave these to dry fully in between, so this process took days. Ugh.
So after 3 coats of polyurethane, the panels are more or less done, and we're gonna put them up today. I say more or less, these are not perfect, but I think at this point the best strategy is to just try to work around any problem areas, cut those off, put those on the edges, try to cover them up with the trim, and then anything that goes up that's just glaringly obvious, I can sort of spot treat in place, rather than doing another coat on these and trying to make them perfect. So this has been a whole journey from that first awful coat of stain and then getting the right stain color and then doing multiple coats of poly over multiple days. It's been just over a week since we started this project, so I'm really excited to get these panels up and bring the false ceiling down entirely and really get a sense of how the new ceiling is going to feel in the space.
In the meantime, my dad moved the wires to the ceiling light that were poking through the walls. Much better. Now, let's hang our wood sheets on the ceiling. We cut them down to the correct size so that the seams would be hidden by our 2x6 grid. Then we mark where the 1x4s are and screw them up into those for maximum support. We countersink the holes so that the screws will sit flush with the top of the wood and keep the 2x6s that will go on top from sticking out weirdly. I tried to arrange the wood pieces to hide the ugliest pieces on the perimeter of the room and chose to stagger the pieces so that they would appear more like smaller individual squares and less like 4x8 sheets. This may be a little bit unnecessary, but at this point with this much work, I don't want to take any chances of this looking crappy. After all the sheets are installed, we can finally remove the rest of the old drop ceiling and see the room with its newly restored 12-foot ceilings.
Okay, so the ceiling is up and I am feeling majorly relieved, both with the color, also with the sheen, also with the idea that this actually worked. So we're moving forward here and see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Now we can remove the remaining 2x4 supports around the outside of the room and the old picture rail. We're gonna put a picture rail back for sure, but this one is in about 15 pieces and only goes partway around the room. So we'll replace it entirely later on in the renovation. Meanwhile, my mom removed all the nails out of the 2x6s that supported the old dropped ceiling. And my dad and I repaired the lats on the hole in the wall to prepare it for plaster patching later. Now we can sort through all the 2x6s, choose the longest and straightest ones for the long pieces that we need, and cut up the others for our shorter pieces. And since we're cutting, let's start preparing our custom trim. We want to add some trim pieces along the inside of the 2x6 squares to cover up the screw holes and to add some detail that will make this feel more like a coffered ceiling. After trying a couple different designs, we landed on this one. So let me show you how we made it. First, we ripped our 2x6s down into 1.5-inch strips. Then we cut the depth down into 1 1/8 inch pieces, since we need the depth to sit lower than our 2x6s. Plus, we want a freshly cut edge to make the pieces look more uniform. And oh yeah, we needed 63 pieces for this, so every cut was repeated 63 times. Now, to achieve the grooved cuts, my dad got this dado blade set that will cut and chip out a section all in one pass. He's adding the 2 blades with 1 small spacer in between. The set itself can cut much wider grooves, but the guard plate for his table saw doesn't have a very wide opening, so this was as wide as we could go. He sets up the saw with the blade at a depth of 1 1/8 inches, and cuts along the edge to remove the first notch. And repeat 62 more times. Then he lowers the blade to 3/8 of an inch and moves the guide over again to cut a lower groove. So this is how our finished pieces will look. And repeat 62 times. With my parents running the cuts, I switched over to sanding all the pieces, both to smooth out the finish, but also to knock off the sharp corners and make them appear more rounded. Since our 2x6s have rounded edges, I think this will help everything blend together. This whole process took forever and might seem kind of unnecessary. We could have bought trim, but we would have had to buy 32 8-foot pieces of trim, which could cost around $300. Plus, we already had the leftover 2x6s on hand, so this process took a lot more work, but it kept us on budget and allowed us to use the materials that we already had. Now we can stain. After doing a test and finding that the espresso stain without the added red tones looked warm enough on these pieces, we went ahead and stained all of the 2x6s and the handmade moldings in the original espresso stain. Matt brought gloves so that I wouldn't get Swamp Witch hands again. This was such a fun day with everyone here chatting and staining and the dogs lounging in the sun. I can't wait for more family project days like this. I was worried that the moldings would stain differently since there was a lot of variation in the wood color after the cuts, but these look great. And all of these got just 1 coat of polyurethane off camera. The sheen looked really even after just 1 coat, so such a relief not to have to do 3 coats. Okay, the moment has arrived. We can now attach our 2x6s and molding pieces to the ceiling and get a glimpse of the finished look. Starting with the 2x6s, I laid out a detailed mock-up on my computer to make sure the boards we had were long enough to create the grid. This also helped us know how to cut down the plywood sheets to make sure the seams were covered. So we cut each piece to length, tested the fit and marked the placement of the 1x4s, and then pre-drilled all the holes for our screws. For the pieces along the wall, we can screw straight in right along the outside edge, since the crown molding that we put up later will cover that up. Again, we countersink the holes to inset the screw heads and allow the pieces that will go on top to sit flat. On the inside edge, we use this jig to drill in at a 45-degree angle. This will position the hole so that our trim pieces can cover the screw heads. And with all the holes pre-drilled, we can put the piece in place and screw it in. Looks good. Now we can repeat that around the room, following my mock-up to be sure that we're placing the right pieces first to make the design work. Some of the pieces did not want to sit at the same level as the cross pieces, so we had to make some adjustments or screw the pieces together on an angle to make them sit as close to the same level as possible. Any areas that are still a little uneven should be okay with a little stain along the edges to hide the difference. Now, this is the point that I tell you that we don't actually finish the entire ceiling in this video. The side along the built-in wall, we want to make sure that that piece goes up right along the edge so that everything is equally spaced. And we don't really know how far the built-ins are going to come out from the wall yet exactly. So we only finished one side of the room. The other side should be pretty easy to wrap up later, but hopefully you can still get a sense of how the whole room is going to look. So moving on to trim. All the pieces need to be cut to length and mitered at a 45-degree angle to fit inside each square on the ceiling. And unfortunately, since the walls are slightly angled and the squares aren't all exactly the same, we need to measure each piece individually. We found it was best to cut all 4 pieces for a square and put them in place to check the fit before nailing any of them in. Sometimes shifting them around a little made the tighter pieces fit without having to trim them again. There are a couple pieces on these that will need stain touch-ups, but I'll do all of that at once we install the built-ins and finish the other side of the ceiling. For now, let's scrape off all the bits of remaining wallpaper and hang a light fixture. I want to put this $10 Restore globe inside of this $25 Restore metal fixture. I think that the globe will offer a softer light to the room and take away from that cage light look that we saw everywhere in 2018. The 2 fixtures had different pipe sizes, so we ended up having to get a smaller threaded pipe to allow these 2 to combine. I thought I could use Rub and Buff to kill the gold shine, but I ended up spray painting it instead. Washers and nuts were added to the pipe to get the globe to hang at the right height inside the cage, and to get the cage to hang at the right height on the pipe. Once all of the pieces of the puzzle come together, we can hang this in place and wrap up this project. For now, at least. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching and following along in this process. This project took a while. We got started on this just over a month ago and there were so many steps and dry times, so lots of days working on this project. I hope it was worth it. I, for one, think it is. I absolutely love it. I love the direction that it's going to take this room in. This is going to be one of those before and afters that we have to use our imagination and see the finished space together. Right now the walls are crumbling in about 8 different colors and half the ceiling is still not done. But I trust you. I know you can see all that and envision how amazing this is going to look when the room is finished. Now, you know the drill. If you like this video, like this video. If you want to stay up to date on my home renovation, be sure that you're subscribed. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon.